So, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of The Long Road Back, a podcast series designed to shine light on the hidden side of injury recovery, to give athletes a voice, and ultimately to help people feel less alone during their recovery process. So, first and foremost, I want to say a massive thank you to all the support so far. It really does mean a lot to me. For those of you who've messaged, those of you who've reached out, it really does mean a lot to me to kind of share your experiences, share your thoughts on the podcast, share your recommendations and whatnot. It really does mean a lot to me, and I really want to build this podcast as kind of a two-way street where you guys, ultimately you're the listeners, I really want you guys to hear what you'd like to hear and the kind of themes you'd like to discuss. So before we get started, I just want to say a really big thank you for the people who reached out and showed their support. It really does mean a lot to me. I think before we get started, let's give a brief overview of the structure of the episode. So first and foremost, I want to kind of explain the kind of trajectory of the podcast and how I really want it to look moving forwards. I then want to have a brief chat about Alysa Liu's story, the figure skater who kind of captivated the world of social media during the Winter Olympic Games. I think there's some really interesting lessons we could learn from some of the things she discussed. And then the last thing, probably the bulk of the episode, will be answering some of your questions. So earlier this week on the Instagram page, I kind of asked, if anyone had any questions for me, whether it be about injuries or my approach to recovery or my own journey. And I've picked out here. I've got the 8 here. I think roughly around 8. Might be 9 actually, but yeah. So got them written down, and I'll be answering your questions as I really hope. Firstly, they'll be able to resonate with you to know more about me, and then secondly, hopefully, we'll be able to kind of mirror maybe some experiences that you've had during injury and kind of share our experiences. So as always, I hope you enjoy it, and any recommendations, any advice, anything, don't hesitate to get involved and get in contact with me. I'm more than happy to take any questions or anything. So first and foremost, I want to kind of talk about the trajectory of the podcast moving forward. So the Long Road Back started initially, was going to target purely elite athletes. I was going to try and get in contact with elite athletes, ask them to share their experiences about injuries and recovery, and use that as a contrast to what social media tells you. Now, that will still be the case. That absolutely will still be the case, but I almost want to expand it slightly more beyond just the elite athlete part, because so much of my journey and my why behind Rebuild revolves around the fact that I was in a team environment and then suddenly I wasn't. And that injury when I was in the team environment, that was the hard one. That was the one that hit the hardest, rather than when I was surrounded by all the physios, all the doctors, etc. It was when I was on my own, was when it hit the hardest. And I know from speaking to you guys that is something that also resonates with a lot of people as well. So I really want to expand the podcast in light of that. So what I want the podcast to be, it's going to be a combination of elite athletes sharing their stories, and that absolutely will remain the same. I'm really excited with a few of the guests we've got lined up. Elite athletes sharing their stories, but also in that same breath, kind of more human, more grounded stories of recovery. I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of explore this podcast, explore my own journey. And I'm not an elite athlete, I'm not a professional rugby player, however much I would love to have been. I'm not a professional rugby player, but I really think it's worth, and I want the podcast to kind of expand that so it becomes a whole platform where these honest conversations happen, rather than simply just with the elite athlete side. Because I think when we can merge the two, where you have the community stories, like myself and then a few other we've lined up, kind of have those stories, and then we can combine that with the elite athlete stories, and then together we can use that to kind of contrast with what social media says about pushing always to do more. I think more than anything, I just want this to be a safe space, and ultimately it's just a platform and a place where we can have honest discussions about injury from the elite side of things, more grounded, maybe slightly more non-elite side, and ultimately bring that together and have lessons about recovery in a safe environment. So that's the main trajectory of the podcast. I hope we kind of explained it properly. Moving on from that, I really want to talk about Alysa Liu. Now, I think that's how you pronounce her name. I think more than anything, I think she absolutely captivated the world. Now, for those of you who don't know, I believe she won gold at the 2026 Winter Olympics as figure skater. I think she won 2 actually, I might be wrong, I'm very confident she won 2 golds. More than anything, first of all, was her character and her charisma kind of captured the world. Incredible personality. I saw a video of her ranking in the top 5 animes, which I respect. So yeah, fair enough. So amazing personality. But more than anything, I wanted the story of Alysa Liu has kind of crept up behind the scenes. And for those of you who don't know, I've kind of written down some notes here. So essentially, after competing at the 2022 Winter Olympic Games, she stepped away from figure skating at the age of 16. And she explained that the pressure and intensity of elite sport had taken away so much of the joy that she once felt towards her sport. Now, rather than pushing through her burnout, she actually chose to step back and rediscover a healthier relationship with the sport, so with figure skating, and in fact her later return, culminating in her winning gold at the 2026 Winter Olympics. I think there's so many lessons we can learn here. And I really want to approach this from an injury perspective. It's also brilliant from a more elite sport perspective as well, in terms of rediscovering that, identity within your sport. But from an injury perspective, looking at her choice to step away, she chose in 2022, arguably at the peak of her powers. Who knew what was going to happen later on, but at the peak of her powers, she chose to take that step back, rediscover her love of the sport, and then return when she felt ready. And she clearly reaped the rewards from that. And I saw an article, I shared it on an Instagram story actually. I saw an article that it said that the story of Alysa Liu marks the downfall of the MAMBA mentality. Now, I never called it the MAMBA mentality, but for those who don't know, it's a reference to Kobe Bryant's nickname MAMBA, and the idea that his character, and he was very incredibly hardworking, determined character, incredible sportsman. But what's interesting is that, and it's something I've mentioned on the podcast before, and particularly in that episode with social media, I think it was 2 episodes ago, that social media always tells you to do more. It always tells you to do more. It's constantly telling you to lock in, burn the boats, no excuses. There's a phrase that I'm sure we've all heard before. But what's so interesting, I think the story of Alysa Liu is that it completely contradicts that, and yet she got to the top of her sport, the top of sport. Olympics is the pinnacle. And what this article goes on to describe was the idea that Alysa Liu really does signal a downfall in that MAMBA mentality. Because for so many of us, when we're told again and again and again, keep pushing, do more, work harder, it's not what we want to hear. Because sometimes we can't. Whether that's through, like in my personal situation now, pain levels, or maybe it might be your family circumstances. It might be factors. They're not excuses, they're reasons. And I think more than anything, this story, and I really enjoyed the article, and I'll try and share it again. I'll tag the link in this episode, but the article essentially says that this story of Alysa Liu, she had so much joy in her sport because she took time away and then came back. And there's so many lessons here that I think we can learn from injury recovery, mainly being this idea that it's okay to step away. Social media isn't everything. And context as well. I imagine the age she is now, she would have grown up at the worst time of social media. The idea that social media has never been more prominent than it is at this time. And she was 16 in 2022, never been more prominent than it is right now. So yeah, essentially, I want to bring it up as I really want to try and a few weeks ago, I brought up the story of the Italian skier. And this one, I like highlighting these stories of recovery. And I think it's so different to so many other athlete stories because the bit in the middle, the bit that no one talks about between the medals, is actually the key part of the story, which is exactly what Rebuild stands for. So I hope we kind of see where that story comes from. Amazing individual, incredibly charismatic. And yeah, well worth, if you haven't seen her performances, well worth a watch. That decline in that MAMBA mentality is so important. So, questions here. So I think it's about 7 or 8 questions. I've got written down here, and I'll kind of answer one at a time. There's quite similar themes to a few of them. And I'll kind of break it up into chunks. So first and foremost, got a question here, and it says, "What is your injury, or what actually is your injury?" That's a really good question, and to be completely honest with you, it's something that I've kind of had to come to terms with myself because it's quite hard to explain. So it's called a Lisfranc injury. Essentially, with the Lisfranc, so if we can picture this as my foot, so very similar hands and feet. So you have on your hands your metatarsals, and on your feet your metacarpals. No. Other way around. One of the way around it is. So on your feet, essentially, I ripped the ligaments. I was playing rugby on a 3G surface, and I stepped down, and I think it was in a breakdown because I don't actually remember it. As far as I'm aware, I got stuck in the ground, twisted, and I got hit at the same time. And I think what happened is, and I think this is what Lisfrancs do, the ligaments rip, and I think it kind of displaced the bone. And because someone described it to me as a dislocation of the bones in your midfoot, which sounds impossible. But that's what happened. I think I read a stat somewhere that 30% are misdiagnosed. So again, that comes back to the point that I may come on to later, but you know your body. And I knew my body and I knew something was wrong. So it's called a Lisfranc or Lifranc. It's a nickname from Napoleonic Wars about a surgeon who had to amputate feet because of the marching and because of this very issue. So it's a Lisfranc fracture. And essentially, so it's both a ligament and a bone. But I eventually dislocated the kind of mid-foot section of my foot. It's amazing how when you start looking for it, you'll find it. So I'd never heard of it, but then when you go online and you see people saying out with major foot injury. Now, I don't know it's a Lisfranc, but it's quite a strong likelihood if it's that severe, it may well be a Lisfranc. So yeah, that's my injury. It's essentially dislocation of the right foot, of the midfoot. So it's not very nice to think about, but there you go. So, and they said, and I've got the next question here. So question 2, it said, I failed consecutively with Lisfranc injury, fusion my last option, any advice? So this very much links to the last one. I think more than anything, you know your body. And for those of us who've struggled with lift ranks, first and foremost, it's incredibly hard to explain to people, which is part of the issue. But the second factor is you know your foot. And it sounds so strange, but unless you've had it, it's really hard to explain. I imagine it's very, very similar to knees and whatnot. So you know your foot. And more than anything, after my first surgery, I knew there was something wrong. I knew that the plate being in my foot wasn't right. I knew there was something wrong with that. So I then had the surgery to take it out, and it has been better since. I've still got further surgeries down the line. But my point being that you know your foot. So on this page, I don't like necessarily, because I'm not a physio, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a consultant, I'm not necessarily qualified to give you medical advice, but what I can do in terms of advice is, from more an emotional point of view, is this idea that make sure you're confident in the person you're seeing. And that's, again, that's not to say medical advice, but having a good consultant, having the right person, someone who's listened to you, is so important in injury recovery. And it's actually quite a hidden aspect of it, because sometimes we just, because of appointments and timings, and it's so much easier said than done, I understand that. But as far as we can do, finding the right person is so important, and is such a massive part of this whole journey. Just, finding the right person to help you, that listens to your story and kind of makes a plan from there. And then in terms of overall advice, again, finding the right person, and then just more than anything, being kind to yourself. If fusion is the last option, then we'll find a way. If fusion is the last option, we will find a way to manage it, to find our way through it, to prepare our body as best we can for the fusion, and then redefine what our life looks like. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's probably not going to happen in a month's time. But if you do opt for that, and actually I will also be taking the fusion option, it's like redefining what progress and what happiness and what sport means to us. It's much easier said than done, and I will come on to that later on in a few more questions time. But yeah, that's kind of the main way I'd look at it. I can't really give out medical advice. I hope you can see that, but definitely can kind of, finding the right people is so important. Next one I got here. What is something you are looking forward to doing after fully recovering? That's a really, really good question. And I think it's definitely one that I imagine a lot of us, I'm going to say all of us, going through this kind of process, however that's looked, that's ACL, shoulders, back, feet. We constantly think about what we're going to do when we're back. I think the hard thing about it is we don't know what when we're back is going to look like. I think more than anything, this might sound be a bit of an insight into my love of pop culture here, or stories. What I'm holding on to, and I will come on to this later question, is this idea, and I got an image of it. So my two favourite film and TV, IPs, in the word, of all time is Lord of the Rings and Attack on Titan. Now, my dream kind of fits into both of them. And the question was being something you're looking forward to doing. I've really got an image in my head of this moment where I'm on the beach, facing out to sea, replicating what Eren does in Attack on Titan. But also then Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand. I've always had a dream to go to New Zealand that was actually cut short by the injuries. And however that looks, I don't know exactly what that looks, but my dream at the moment is this idea that I'm on the beach facing out to sea. I don't know when that will come about. I don't know if it will come about, but in terms of honing in on something, that's what I'm honing in on. Because I don't know what's going to happen with sport. It's really quite hard to admit, but I really don't know what's going to happen. My absolute goal at the moment is to return to walking, and then we'll see what we can do from there. So rather than setting my goal to return to rugby, which actually comes on to the next question, which mentions, do you want to go back to rugby? And what's your plans exercise-wise following recovery? They kind of link together, those questions, because more than anything, I want to return to rugby. I'd give anything. I think most of us were to return to our sport. I'd love to travel the world and using rugby as a tool to travel the world. But I can't think like that, unfortunately. And this kind of comes to my idea of acceptance, which I've had to accept that, this has changed my life. And the more I fight it and the more I think, okay, I really want to return to rugby, the harder I find it is to focus on what's going on. Because I'm thinking, oh, well, if I can't even walk, how am I going to return to rugby? The timelines are going, the seasons are going. What if something else goes? And I've had to, it's not overnight. I'm still struggling with it now. And I actually, the other day, I had a really bad moment where I kind of lost my head. I was just, this is so frustrating because, as you say, I love more than anything to go back to rugby, but I can't. And the more I try and force myself to go back to rugby, the harder I kind of find managing the small steps in front of me are. So going back to that question of what is something you're looking forward to doing, it's where that idea of those kind of, the moments in the films kind of come from, because being there doesn't, just being at the beach, or I don't know, being in New Zealand or standing out to sea, replicating those images that I can see in the films and television, that if I can have that image in my head, and that's my goal, and that image might change, but the idea of being, that's what will mean success, because it doesn't mean that I have to return to my sport, because I'm trying to shift sport away from the center of my identity. It just means that, okay, I've got this image in my head, that this symbolic image that of being free, but this idea that I've allowed myself to redefine what success looks like. My identity's been reshaped. I still have this love of rugby. I still have this love of all sport. And if I can get to that point of being on the beach, being happy with what's going on, even if I can't run at that point, even if I can't do triathlons and rugby, I know that I'm at a point where I can build upwards from there. So it's quite an interesting one to explain and kind of get insight into my love of all things nerdy and whatnot. But imagine for lots of other people as well, when they kind of ask this question, something looking forward to doing, we'd be looking forward to doing anything. I think more than we'd be looking forward to, if I had a clean slate now and I knew that I'd be 100% okay, and maybe rugby wasn't quite the sport that it is, I'd be like, I'd love to return to rugby. I'd go running, I'd triathlons, I'd do Ironmans, I'd do all sorts of things. I'd love to learn how to play ice hockey. These are things I'd more than anything love to do. And it's not a criticism of the question. It's more, okay, the more I kind of allow myself to, build this base, allow myself to, control what's going on around me, create those really small steps. And if the goal that I'm aiming for is reasonable, but also it's this kind of like dream that it's not one thing, it's not returning to a rugby game. It's kind of this whole image of, being free of your injury, being okay, being happy with what's happened, allowing yourself to live in that space. It just means that the progress becomes a lot easier to digest, especially on those bad days, rather than reaching for the top. So it's a bit strange. It kind of go size, but it's very, very personal to me. And obviously, yes, this is kind of what I wanted the questions to be about. But I'm hoping you kind of see the message of, I'm so looking forward to doing this. I've got this image of like being there, and I know that what I'm happy is not unreasonable. And I think me thinking about that goal isn't going to make me more frustrated about what's going on. It's actually going to inspire me, compare upwards, inspire me to get there, rather than getting bogged down thinking, my dreams to play rugby again, but today my foot really hurt again. I'm never going to get there. So that's kind of the thing I can picture doing. So the next question is a really, really, really good one. And it's actually, I've just realized it's come on to the last thing I just said. How would you accept your injury? And I think this is such a good question. And again, I did touch on it just now, but now to fully explore this, it's hard. It's so hard. I think more than anything, I'm still dealing with this. I'm still dealing with, how do I accept this injury? Because on the one hand, on one day, I might be thinking, yeah, it's okay. Again, I've got that dream in my head. We'll just keep going. We'll get back to walking, then we'll go from there. We're going to take small steps. But then sometimes, especially with the Six Nations on and other games on, you think, what I wouldn't give to not be like this. Why am I like this? I can get so frustrated and angry and upset and confused about my injury, about what's going on, because I don't understand. I think to myself, I didn't deserve this. I think to myself, what have I done? Why is it hurting so much? And all of that conflicts with this idea of acceptance. So more than anything, I want to get across, how do I accept my injury? I probably haven't fully yet, to be fully transparent. And that's not, and I hope this can resonate with people, that I'm not saying that in like I'm not listening to my own advice, or I'm not whatever. It's genuinely, it takes so much time. I think it's something like anything, like most forms of grief, the time is the only thing that heals it, really, truly. And I think allowing myself to accept what's going on is tough, but the kind of strides that I'm making to try and do that really do involve kind of bringing everything back. And I kind of picture it like a castle where you have the main bit in the middle, and then you have the inner walls, the outer walls, and maybe the moat on the outside. More than anything, right now, it's okay, right, bring the chips in, everything back to center. We're protecting this middle, which is me. We're protecting, my being, and then slowly but surely, we're going to edge our way outwards. But if we try and protect the moat on the outside before we allow ourselves to build the small steps internally, we're going to become even more frustrated. And I think it's just this, it's ultimately this idea that give yourself the space, bring everything back. Okay, take the breath. We're going to get through this. What choices can I make that were going to help me accept the injury? And as I alluded to earlier, it's not even this microcosm of injury isn't linear at all. Some days I'm like, okay, I got this, going to do my rehab, going to get the tiny few steps that I can get in, like 500 steps or something. I'm going to, expand my personality. I'm learning the guitar. But then some other days it becomes incredibly difficult. Other days you think, oh God, what I want to give, why is this happening? So more than anything, I think being kind to yourself is massive. And then secondly, just allowing yourself that space to feel upset, allowing yourself the space to feel upset, allowing yourself the space to feel frustrated. But more than anything, it's being kind to yourself in that space. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I can only speak of my experiences, but when you give yourself that space, when I give myself that space, I know I feel better. But when I get myself obsessed with what's going on at the end, obsessed with the end goal, it becomes incredibly difficult. And I think that's the time when I get frustrated, is when I'm thinking about the end goal, and the more I think about it is that I'm not playing rugby again, I'll never play a step on a rugby field again, all these kind of things. That's when it becomes overwhelming. And it's like, and that will happen. Of course it happens, and it's okay that it happens. But it's right, okay, how can we help mitigate that as much as possible to keep focusing on what's in front of us? So I hope that kind of answers the question. And so the next question here is, how do you keep going when struggling mentally? And then the next question actually is, how do you get through the low point after surgery? And this is a really good question. And to be completely honest with you, I don't know. And I don't mean that in a critical way. It's just some days you can and some days you can't. And I think what I want to take from that is, there will be bad days. And I think if anyone tries to come out here and say, aka social media, but if anyone tries to come on and tell you that every day is going to be okay and your recovery is going to look like that, a clear linear path, they are wrong. They are utterly wrong. Now, I don't normally get direct with these things, but they are wrong, because injuries are never linear. There's always some degree of positive days and bad days. So how do I keep going when I'm struggling mentally? How do I keep going when I'm at that low point? It's incredibly hard. I think more than anything, it comes back to that feeling of just bring everything back. And it is so hard, because I've had days, even I think a few days ago, I had a day where I had some pain in my foot and I couldn't deal with it. I mentally couldn't process it. I felt like I had a good days back to back, and suddenly out of nowhere, this came about. And I think trying to mitigate and manage those bad days, those really bad days, are tough. And what I'm trying to do, and it's the reason why I attach that, what's my goal when I'm back, to this image of something that means a lot to me anyway, but this image of, being on a beach, being by the sea. Obviously, I use the New Zealand as a Lord of the Rings example, but being on a beach, being in the sea, feeling the fresh air and feeling free, is this idea that I want to attach it to something that can be applied in lots of different ways. I can be on that beach and still be, struggling with injury to a degree. I can be there without having to fulfill certain criteria. It's this idea that, okay, that's what I'm holding on to. I'm going to hold on to that image. And when it gets dark, because it does get really dark, it's the knowledge for me that I know that I've got a goal that won't be determined by the bad days. And I've got a goal that won't be changed by the bad days, and that is going to come with bad days. So that when those bad days arise, I'm like, okay, let's just get through these bad days, really bring it back, give myself the space to feel upset, because it's upsetting, it's hard. God, I've cried at 1 a.m. I've lost my head, been angry, frustrated with these things. It's so hard. So I think when you keep going struggling, how do you keep going when you're struggling mentally? It's this, for me, what's helped, again, I'm not saying works for everyone, but for me it's helped, is having this image in my head that, okay, there is light at the end of this tunnel. How can I make the choices right now to protect myself and help myself when I'm feeling incredibly low? Because sometimes the injuries can absolutely overwhelm you. We can get caught up with what's going on at the end. I can think, right, I can't play rugby, I can't go running, I can't even walk. Like, what is going on? And more than anything, it's this idea that, okay, can I take that step back? Can I allow myself to feel these feelings of frustration and fear and isolation and everything I've just mentioned, but know that me feeling those feelings doesn't mean I will never reach my goal? Because if I had the goal of a specific thing, like it can be a specific thing, but if my personal goal right now, given my personal circumstance, if my personal goal was rugby, which unfortunately for me is unrealistic, and I've come to that acceptance, if I were then to have a bad day, then I'd be, oh my God, I can't do this. But this idea that if I can just, focus on the small steps, even with that goal in mind, if I can just focus on the small steps in front of me, the really small, tiny baby steps. Also, if there's one thing I could do today, and for me, where that's just doing my rehab, it can be the most simple stretch ever, but if we can find a way to focus on, find, tangible things that we can hold on to and take those small steps, they really help me when I'm struggling mentally. Because everyone talks about, small steps. Everyone, focus on the small things. But we can only focus on the small things when we've allowed ourselves the space to feel upset, allow ourselves the space to feel frustrated, and not get caught up with an end goal. Just focus, okay, the small steps are important when I treat them as small steps, not as, oh, I've got to get to there. And I think that's meant a lot to me. That's really helped me. And you mentioned here, so how did you get through the low point of surgery? So I've had 2 surgeries on my foot. So the first one was much bigger, where I had to scrape away a lot of scar tissue and put a plate in. But the second one was to take the plate out, and I still had to do the recovery. And there were slightly different timelines. But one thing I did very differently the second time than the first time was allow my body to rest. Because the first time I was fighting it. I remember being downstairs, tiny, I say weights room. It's an old study that's got, my dad's bought like 4 dumbbells for it. I was trying to do chest pressing there with my moon in a boot. I was trying to do core work. I was trying to do so many things. But all that did was make me feel even further behind. So the second time, when I had the surgery, I was sat in my bed, or I sat downstairs, foot elevated, plenty of fluids, ate what I wanted to eat, because ultimately, as I keep saying, the mental health is the most important part. I allow myself to have things like chocolate bars. I allow myself to sit and watch the television. I allow myself to, play a bit of Minecraft without feeling guilty, because I knew that if I allowed my body to truly rest, then my recovery would become that much quicker. Because the more I fought it, the more I fought against the recovery, I actually found it even harder. So that's one thing I really learned, was that the low point of a surgery, it's this idea, like from Pirates of the Caribbean, and the third one, they go up is down. So that, you know what? Yes, this is bad. And it is really, really hard. Again, this is just from my experience. I'm not trying to say, this isn't necessarily medical advice. But for me, the more I went, you know what? I'm struggling with this. So you know what? I'm just going to sit and rest this. You know what? I'm just going to think of the here and now. What does my foot need? It needs to rest. Okay, we're going to rest. Then when I get the stitches out, okay, what can I do now? If that means I can do some stretching, I'm going to do some stretching. But I'm not going to try and force things that all they're going to do is make it worse. So that's definitely something that I've personally learned that's really, really helped me. And more than anything, it's really helped. So I hope that comes across. This idea that, and they're very, very important questions. This idea that Shorty meant is allow yourself to feel those feelings and then think, okay, is there one thing we can do to take a bit of control back over our injury? And then we slowly expand from there. And the last question I've got here is, how did you find the strength to believe it will be over? Or how do you find the strength to believe, how do you find the strength to believe it will be over? And that is such a good question. And more than anything, again, I'm not sure, because it's hard. And I think for me, I don't say I'm not sure because it's not going to happen. I just mean that it's still an ongoing process. I think more than anything, I'm holding on to, I remember a quote from Harry Potter, it's, Dumbledore says something, if one only remembers to turn on the light, and happiness can be found even in the darkest times, as long as one remembers to turn on the light, along those lines. And I've really tried to use that. And this doesn't mean that it's easy, but what I'm really holding on to is that it will be okay, that I trust in myself, that I will find a way. And that's not arrogant, it's not complacent, because I think more than anything, those of us with injury recovery, injuries humble you like nothing else. Your perspective on the world entirely changes. I'm very, very confident that the people listening to this who've had injuries, we know that the way we perceive friendship problems, relationship problems, family problems, they have all categorically changed since this injury, because the injuries have changed us. So more than anything, this idea that strength to believe it's over, I think it's just this idea that I have to trust, no matter what, no matter how dark it is, I have to trust that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that light, I don't know what it looks like yet. And it will look different for everyone else. And that's what I really want to stress with this. And what Rebirth really stands for is that it can be different for other people. For me, my light at the end of the tunnel has been sparked by my love of the show Attack on Time and Lord of the Rings. And I've kind of combined them. And I think that's my light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I'd love more than anything for the light at the end of the tunnel to be something definitive, like a rugby game. And for some people it will be. But for me, for me, that doesn't quite work. But for some it might be. And so ultimately, more than anything, I'm holding on to that idea that I have to believe in that. Because time will pass anyway. Time will pass whether I do the rehab or not. I can't stop time. I can't rewind time. If I could rewind time, I wouldn't have gone into that breakdown. But I can't rewind time. So time will pass naturally anyway. So then I'm thinking, okay, how best can I use my time to do everything I can to get to that point without overwhelming myself? I think the strength, and I think it's interesting as well to talk about the strength for it to be over. And it's something that I'm really battling at the moment, is that, what do I mean when it's over? Because this injury will be with me for life. In the same way my dislocated shoulders and my labrum shatter and my concussions, they've been with me for my whole life. And I'm trying to really rephrase that it's not a bad thing that they stay with me. So the idea that it's over, I see the word over as, when I've then gained control back over my own body, back over the injury, back over the situation, and I'm in control of what's going on. I'm managing pain. I'm able to do certain things that have allowed me, so whether it's walking, whether it's hiking, whether it's swimming, whether it's something even as simple as taking the dog for a walk, they mean everything to us going through injury recovery. And I think I'm trying to avoid the idea that being better is the only way to be happy. And I'm really trying to learn to live in those spaces in between. By allowing myself to be happy and to live in those spaces between recovery, between the bad days, between the good days, it really, really helps me move towards that idea of it being over, because it being over suddenly just becomes natural. I don't have to get over the hurdle. I've already gone through it. Because by allowing myself the space, whether it's learning the guitar, whether it's just simply smiling with a friend or family, whether it's sharing your experiences with someone, I think when you allow yourself the space to feel that happiness, the idea that it will be over, it becomes so much more natural, and we don't have to like step over a hurdle to finish. We've kind of naturally, as the sense of injury kind of fizzles out into our life, and we manage to gain control back over what's going on. Long-winded answer, but I hope it comes across. So yeah, I really hope that Q&A was interesting. I know I went off on all sorts of tangents. I really hope it wasn't too nerdy, or I didn't get too deep into some other stuff. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it. Essentially, what I want to get from this is that more about maybe an insight into who I am and my journey, into why kind of rebuild means so much to me, because it's kind of born out of my own experiences. And then more than anything, I'm really trying to move those goalposts. And it's so hard. The idea, like for someone like myself, I've played rugby. I trained 5-6 times a week since the age of 13. So just suddenly go from that to nothing is unbelievably hard. And I think more than anything, what I want to get across is that it's okay to do that. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to have those dark times after the surgery, because yeah, that's a flashpoint. That's hard. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to manage these things. And I think what I'm really hoping, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm hoping that the more and more I can accept and I can allow that sense of happiness into my life, and it's not a finished product at all, but the more I can allow happiness into my life and live in those spaces between injuries, live in those spaces between the bad recovery days, the painful days, the more I can be happy in my own journey. And then when I get to the end of, it's over, or my own sense of fulfillment, standing on that beach, it doesn't feel like I'm having to step over a hurdle. So I hope that helps. As I said, I've got a podcast coming out next week with a really exciting guest who do loads of work in the injury space, in mental health space. I think we have a really honest discussion and deep dive into social media, into some of the struggles that athletes face, and just a very honest discussion about how hard recovery can be. So I really hope you'll enjoy next week's episode. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and hope you have a nice week.